On my Instagram, I did a review of The Many Lives of Mama Love, and all the review was this face. I want to unpack that face a little bit, because it's not just that I was reading shocking things on the page. This book challenged me. You and I have spent the last 2 nights together. I think you're going to be able to handle this. In the beginning, I judged Laura. Then, I judged myself for judging Laura. Then, I judged the systems that are in place in our country. I had every range of emotion while reading this book. Sadness, anger, happiness, love. It's just a phenomenal, phenomenal story, and thank you so much for being here and sharing it. Lara Love Hardin is the president and founder of True Literary, a full-service boutique literary agency. She has an MFA in creative writing and is a 6-time New York Times best-selling writer, including the #1 New York Times best-selling Designing Your Life by Dave Evans and Bill Burnett, and the 2018 Oprah Book Club pick The Sun Does Shine, which she co-authored with Anthony Ray Hinton about his 30 years as an innocent man on Alabama's death row. There are well over 1 million copies sold of the many books she has written, and now you can find on their title page in the acknowledgments books by Nelson Mandela, John Gottman, Evie Pemporis, and other luminary authors on the Idea Architects roster. In 2019, she won a Christopher Award for her work affirming the highest values of the human spirit. In 2019, she was also nominated for an NAACP Image Award, won the Moore Prize in the UK, and was shortlisted for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. In 2020, she launched her own division within Idea Architects True, as a literary agent specializing in memoir. She lives in La Selva Beach, California, but she is here on Nantucket Island today. Please welcome Mama Love. Hello, bestie.
Hi, bestie. Before we start, does anyone in the front row have a tissue? Because I was already tearing up, and I'm going to need a tissue probably, because you might make me cry.
We had some tissues. So let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. The first sentence of your book, The Many Lives of Mama Love. Reading, thank you.
Thank you.
Reading was my first addiction. Can you dig in there?
So it's true, reading was my first addiction, and some novelist who's, I don't know who they are, I should know their name, but they said the first sentence of a book should contain the whole book. And so when I started the book and I started there, I mean, I really had to go back and think about that first addiction. And you know, reading for me was an escape. And my addiction to reading from a really young age, I was a precocious reader. I read Gone with the Wind when I was 6 twice. But I read as an escape for a chaotic home life and some trauma, and I dove into books. And you know, reading is a gateway drug to writing, as we know. Yeah, that was my first addiction, and I wouldn't say it's an addiction now, it's a job, but.
Was that the first sentence you actually wrote for the book?
Yes.
So you're originally from Concord, Massachusetts, so not too far away from here. And I want to talk about your growing up. You mentioned it a little bit. And I'm going to bring up, you loved this question, Aristotle. So Aristotle says, give me a child until he is 7, and I will show you the foundations of the man. Well, first of all, Aristotle is very sexist, so we're going to switch that to give me Lara Love until she is 7, and I'll show you the foundations of the woman. What were those foundations?
Better, Aristotle.
What were those foundations, and how did that set you on this journey that you tell us in this story?
I mean, I think I learned really early on that I was safer alone. I learned, by 7, I was highly attuned to the emotions of other people. I was watching. I learned, this is like therapy, I should lie down on that bench. But it did carry through my life. I did learn that somehow my emotional life I should keep inside until I wrote this book and poured it all out. And I became an observer, and that was part of what I was doing when I was reading at a young age. I was trying to figure out how other people lived. And I was very much alone for my childhood. And, books made sense to me. There's like clear motivations in a book. Like if you're reading Judy Blume, you know why people are doing stuff when you're young. In the real world, in my family and people around me, I didn't necessarily understand the motivations and what was happening. So, books were a solace and a salvation and a love, and my first love. And an addiction.
Do you agree with Aristotle's quote? You wrote a book that's about the many lives, and this quote, if you don't understand it, is he's basically saying that we're not really far away from who we were when we're 7 years old.
Yeah.
Do you agree with it?
I mean, I kind of want to argue with Aristotle just because that's who I am. I wouldn't do it with Socrates, but Aristotle. I think the seeds are there. But I think we evolve and change, and that's what this book is about too. So I don't want to. I think the roots are there from a lot of things, but you're not stuck in it. Yeah. And I think the foundations that can come at 7 that maybe aren't so great become your superpowers later. So
you say your real addiction was escape on page 1. The truth is, I've only ever had one addiction. The white whales of addictions, escape. From as far back as I can remember, there has been a better place than wherever I am, a better me than whoever I was. So the opposite definition of escape is sitting down and writing a whole personal story about your whole life. When did you decide that you could do that?
That I should do that or I could do that?
Both. Answer both.
Both. Yeah. Where this book starts, I was never going to write this book at that time, right? Because I was I was so full of shame, I was going to keep what's in this book a secret. And I did for, over a decade. And it was only, 11 years after the start of this book that I decided to tell this story. And part of it was that shame is so sticky and heavy, and there was so much freedom in telling her story. It's better than any drug I've ever taken, honestly, just honestly saying all the things that I was afraid people would find out about me.
When did you start writing it again?
So at the end of 2019, I gave a TED Talk, a local TED Talk in Santa Cruz, California, and I was never going to do that. The organizer came to my literary agency office and said, "I'm not leaving till you say yes." It took her 4 hours, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And I had 2 days to prepare, and I got up on that stage and I said the thing that I was afraid people would find out, that I'd lived in fear of people Googling me about, right? There's a chapter, well, we're in a church, it's effing Google, one of the chapter titles. But I lived in fear of people finding out the worst version of me that I had been and finding out my past. So I got on that stage and I said, here's the thing. And I felt this lightness, and people responded. And the thing that I learned at 7 was that, somehow I internalized, was that if I'm vulnerable, if I tell you the truth, people are going to run away from me. And what I found from that first little TED Talk was that it was the opposite. The more honest I was, the more people ran toward me because they felt safe, and then they wanted to tell me their secrets. And so I did, that talk was the catalyst. And then I wrote a book proposal, because with nonfiction books, you sell it before you've written it. And it sold, and then I was like, oh, now I got to do it.
Write it. How was the process for you? So novelists, I think, they're jotting down, and they work for a whole day, and they're like, oh, this is crap, I can't use any of this. This is your life you're writing. Yeah. So you're not
like, oh, this is crap.
You're not only the writing you have to put down on the paper, but then it's also you're unpacking so much of what you went through. So how was that process?
It was, I've worked with a lot of people on memoirs, so there's part of my brain that's like, you start in the action, you pick the scenes that are pivotal, that's what you remember. So there's a part of me that had that going on, and then there was the part of me that, this is my first book as me, but my 14th book I've written, and I didn't know and 12 of those were for men. So I didn't know my own voice. That was the hardest thing, is to be like, what is actually my true, honest voice on the page? And I was only gonna do the book if I could be super honest. And so the process, it was hard. I had a few false starts. I just read a couple chapters that I had written that never made it in the book. And it wasn't even like, they were in third person. One took place in Concord, Massachusetts, and I was 12. And I was like, why was I putting this in there? But it was a false start. And then to actually do the book, I went away. I had to go to a different time zone. I went to Koh Samui, Thailand by myself for 7 weeks. And I had to go away from my family, from my children, from work. There was a very little time zone window that anyone could get a hold of me. And there's things that I put in the book that were actually not in the book proposal, that I hadn't told anyone, that my editor didn't know. My agent did, like agents need agents, like therapists need therapists. And so nobody knew that. And I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I have to do it as raw and real as possible. And if you can, razzle dazzle with writing, you could fake honesty on the page, where some people would like, oh, this is so honest. And I would like, not really. But I really wanted to do it authentically to me and just get it all out there. And so it was, I wrote a whole first draft in 7 weeks. The original table of contents has a lot more chapters because I'm very impatient, and so I want to do only a chapter a day. So I'd like a lot of 10-page chapters.
I want those.
Yeah. Oh, I have them. Yeah.
You're the perfect person to ask this question because you're a literary agent that specializes in memoir and you've helped people write memoirs. Can you talk to me about how one writes a memoir? Because you are writing when you are on the other side of the experience that you had. You're writing conversations that you're obviously not remembering verbatim. What are the rules of memoir writing, if there are any?
The laws. I think, Margaret Atwood was talking about it. If you guys saw Margaret Atwood last night, it was talking about memoir, and it really is the things you remember, and what you remember are the pivotal scenes. Unlike autobiography, where like if you're older and you're like, I was born on this day, and then I did this, that's autobiography. In memoir, you're really thinking about what do you want the reader to take away at the end, and then what scenes fit that, more than like all the factual things that happen. So, I made a list of all the scenes I wanted to put. I just brainstormed it, like, 5 words, like daddy in jail or what, all the things. And those are the pivotal scenes. And so like, even if you look at the book, The Time in Jail, there's not that many scenes because it's the ones I remembered and the ones that fit the themes and the threads. So you really have to know like what the themes and threads are to pick, because if you're just telling all the things that happen, it's not going to be the most compelling page turner.
Were you shocked with certain scenes that came up that you're like, wow, this was pivotal?
I was shocked, but I was, one of the gifts of memoir is you get to find the patterns in your own life, right? And that's always a rear view mirror thing. Like in it, I'm not like, oh, this is someday going to be a powerful lesson on power from Oprah, but when you're narrativizing your life and your story and you're making sense and you're making meaning out of the mess and you're finding the threads, it's always astonishing, like how, especially, that's why I love memoir, because true stories, like if it were fiction, you wouldn't believe this. Like if this were fiction, you'd be like, that's not very believable.
You're like, it sure is. Yeah. What I loved about this book, Lara, is that I felt like you rang my doorbell, you came into my house, sat on my couch, and told me this story. That's how you found your voice, because it's like we're over a campfire, and you're like, let me tell you a story. The title is The Many Lives of Mama Love, and I watched a couple of interviews before you came here, and one was with Oprah, and she was listing out the lives. She said graduate student, that's what the first thing she said, then she said thief, then she said addict. I want to know what you actually say that the lives are and the power that you give all the lives that you say you had. What are those titles, and how many do you think you lived?
There's so many and so many more. Like I used to think I needed one normal life because I thought all of you had one normal life, and nobody does. I think mom is a big one for me. Student, like all the things, friend. Now I'm someone who likes to connect with people. Like I love going to book clubs. Like that was never a title I would have given me. I was such an introvert, believe it or not. I was, I desperately wanted to talk to you, but I'm going to kind of hide from you. And I've changed. I've changed since the book came out. I've changed, obviously, since the book started. So my many lives, there's so many more to come, and it's a good thing now, And I think everybody is many lives. I think when we get stuck, and I certainly got stuck in certain identities in my life, and I think when we get stuck in that one thing, it hurts us.
It's funny that you're not giving power to, if all of us would say what the lives were, the bad things, the things that you wrote about here are not what you're giving the power of as one of your lives, which I think is actually beautiful.
Yeah, I just forgot. No, no. I mean, the thing is for a long time, I was the neighbor from hell, right? I invested myself into the worst version of me. I was the worst thing ever said about me. Or I was an addict, or I was a criminal, or I was bad. And now, those, our life is a pie. There's all of those I'm going to put in one little slice now, rather than the whole.
Yeah.
I lost track of that metaphor, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
You and I have sat next to each other at dinner the last 2 nights, and this is an observation I made, and I love that you actually kind of mentioned it. But you are an extremely thoughtful observer. There are 2 examples that I have. Last night we were, if you don't know the Coe brothers, Nate Coe and Ruben and Manny that wrote Brother Do You Love Me, it was time to go to dinner, and we all stood up. And Ruben was going to, and I'm going to cry a little because if you weren't at their event, it was so emotional. And Ruben was at the table alone. And you looked at me and you said, are we going to leave Ruben alone by himself? And I just thought that was so thoughtful and an observer. And there was another example that I won't necessarily bring up, but you, I think, touched someone that works on this festival and brought them to tears. Do you know that about yourself, that you're thoughtful? Do you think that is because you are a writer, that you're observer? Stephen Rowley also brought up that writers are observers, and you're aware of that. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say from that story that I pointed that out, but you actually sat with him, and I went to get my food. Yeah,
because
I didn't.
Well, I'm the ultimate host, so I was like, well, I'm gonna let you go.
I was like, someone should, be kind.
I think what I consider myself thoughtful, but I didn't think about it, and I felt like it was so beautiful that you thought about that.
I think I am an observer, and again, when I was talking about the hypervigilance that might be like a trauma response become our superpowers, and I think empathy is something I learned very early on, and I certainly refined it in jail, and I also think, as writers, regardless of if you're writing fiction or nonfiction, you're looking at the world through other people's eyes, right? So I'm like, is this guy bored? Did he get dragged here? I'm thinking about that while we're talking. I mean, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but maybe.
Why did she call on me?
We don't, but and I'm endlessly curious and fascinated by people. So I'm also very nosy, right? That is the other side of that. Is I'll stare at you, and I'll think about what you're thinking. I do that. My children. It's been this joke, my 4 boys, that will go to a restaurant and they'll all try to get me facing a wall because it drives me crazy. and because I'm like, and they're like, Mom, stop staring. But I'm curious about people and so, yeah, I think I'm, sometimes it's obnoxious. I think I know what people are thinking, and sometimes I'm wrong because we're all coming from our bias. But I think that's one of the hardest things for me when I had this other identity, is because who people are, and certainly who I am, and I know this about other people, who people are at their worst, especially when they're in a mental health crisis or in the compulsion of addiction. That's not who I am. I know, who I am is not who I am. Addicted to opiates is not who I am. At my core. So, that is the mix there with that. And I do think, I totally lost my train of thought, but I do, yeah.
So looking back, you have a page and you're talking about the worst part is this in-between part. And it's like you're leaning back in a chair and you haven't fallen, but you're not in stand. I want to talk about when you've fallen. What was your lowest point? Can you pick a specific moment? And then I want you to think that I'm gone, and I want you to talk to that Lara Love Hardin, and I want you to ask her a question. What would you tell her?
I think, I mean, the lowest point is really where I originally was going to start the book, but now it's chapter 3, which is a whole other story. But it was because in the throes of addiction, I became really good at lying to myself. I thought I was great at lying to other people, but I was really good at lying to myself. And there was always this thing where I knew this is not me. And I knew, no one grows up saying, I hope I'm addicted. I hope I get to be a criminal. I hope I get felonies. I hope I go to jail someday. Like that is not a thing. And we forget that. But I always thought like, tomorrow I'll fix it, right? Tomorrow I'll fix it. And so the lowest point was the moment when and this is 15 years ago and it's still like, I'm ready for it. It was when, it wasn't even that the police were at my house, that I was in handcuffs and they were about to take me away, because a part of me was a little bit relieved at that. But it was this moment where I couldn't lie to myself because my son Caden was almost 4 and they had called CPS. They wouldn't let me call someone. And he's at that stranger danger age, and it's chaos in the house and sheriffs and CPS, and he's running to me for comfort. And my hands are handcuffed behind my back, and I can't comfort him. And that was the moment when I couldn't lie to myself anymore. And it was like, it wasn't about like, I couldn't lie about the collateral damage in that moment. That was an irreversible, no turning back, future college essay topic moment, right? And that was a moment when I was like, oh, there is no recovery from this.
So you can see her, so what would you say to her?
It's hard because that was I do get emotional, and I've had it was a traumatic moment for both of us. And for the longest time, it was really only recently that I was like, oh, I need to heal from that trauma. But I thought you can't heal from trauma you caused yourself. I was like, yeah, but I did that. I don't know what I would say to me. I don't know that I have a lot of compassion for my choices. In that moment, that's a hard one. I think I would tell myself that it's gonna not be okay for a long time and that it'll be okay again.
Thank you for answering that. I have a tissue too. Is there a person that you haven't been able to talk to? This is kind of the same type of question, so if you want to pass it, you can.
No, I'm good. We're in it now. Let's go.
Is there a person that you haven't been able to talk to and say something to, another person other than yourself, that you'd also want to say something to?
It's interesting. I have talked, for a long time I didn't go back to my neighborhood, because here, I regret that the hard way in which I have to learn things, in the meaning I'm making over a narrative, that I hurt people I really cared about. And obviously I've talked, my children and all of that, we've talked all along from the beginning. There were neighbors I hadn't talked to, but my son, got married, and they were, a lot of the people in the book and that I hadn't seen were at the wedding. And there are 2 neighbors that I care about, and I saw them. And it is kind of the thing where they know that when they're ready to talk, I'm ready to talk. But part of the, like if you're making amends sometimes is like, it has to be received. They have to be ready for that. I can't just be like, I'm ready. Let me say, let me feel better by saying I'm sorry. So I think there's a talk coming. There's another wedding coming, so I think we're gonna do it before. And and it's hard though, because I said it in the book, and sometimes like, look, I said sorry here. That's easier.
Read page 5,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. There's no one person that I haven't. I've pretty much, I hid from people for a long time, and I don't do that anymore. So I've pretty much said all the things, unless there's someone I've forgotten about who's now gonna be like, hey, I regret hurting people that I cared about and people in my community, and because it's not who I am. And I have a lot more understanding of my choices and reasons, and I can't really control what other people know.
And you shouldn't have to. Have you found a way to love yourself again? Because you say here, I don't think I've ever known how I am or who I am. So how are you and who are you?
I'm good.
You're looking good.
I'm good. Yeah, I mean, I think loving yourself is a practice, and I think my thing I'm conscious of now is what my default is. My default with other people is always, I'm going to assume the worst. I'm going to wait for the other shoe to drop. So I have to consciously not do that. I have to assume good intentions. And I have to I have to treat myself with the same grace and compassion and forgiveness and love that I have for other people. And that's a practice. In general, I feel like right now I am great. I feel like I've never been more me in my life than I am now. And I was someone who spent a lot of time being other people growing up, a lot of time being other people in books, and trying to be who I am based on who you want me to be or who I think this guy's gonna hold his interest. I don't know why I'm focusing on you, but we're here. It's exhausting, and I think, I think loving yourself is a practice. So I'm trying.
I mentioned Aristotle. The other scholar, RuPaul, says, how are you going to love yourself if you can't love somebody else?
Exactly. I'm not going to argue with that one.
So you had experiences and that you touch on in the book. And so if you haven't read it, please make sure that you go and get it. There are real issues in our country, addiction and incarceration. And I was just talking to someone before this event started and how angry it made us in the system. Can you talk about those two things and what we are maybe ignorant in this room about them?
Yeah, I mean, there's right now in the U.S. alone, there's 48 million people struggling with addiction. And then you think about, how many people love those people? So I don't know, I do words, not math, but we're up there. We're up in the whole, everybody knows someone who's struggling, and it's a really hard thing to love someone who's struggling with addiction. And there's so much stigma and shame, and it's better now than it was. When I became addicted to opiates, they were prescribed to me by a doctor. And this was before the opiate crisis was a crisis. Opiates were handed out, it's sample packs. You had an earache, here you go. You're in a mood, here you go. It was like the opium of the Victorian era. It was everywhere. And for me, I grew up with addiction and alcoholism in my family, and I thought, I'm gonna outsmart that. I'm gonna educate, I can outrun that. And then I couldn't. And so, I had a lot of judgment for myself, and I think we still have a lot of judgment for people. I think it's better. And incarceration, especially, I can speak mostly to incarcerated women, is the fastest growing population, 750% increase in the past 3 decades. And 100% of incarcerated women, whether it's jails, federal prison, or prisons, have a history of trauma. It's like, I embellish statistics a little bit, but I have a nonprofit that has the actual ones. But it's close to 100%. And the reasons women in jail are often interpersonal. There's a huge incidence of childhood abuse, domestic violence. It's a population of traumatized women in a system that is re-traumatizing and triggering them every day. It's a system that was built for men, it's controlled by men, it's run by men, and it's really hard to get people to care about incarcerated women because it is a small population. But 80% of the women in jails are mothers of minor children. So if you care about incarcerated women, you're also caring about foster care. You can't care about one and not the other. And the system it's complicated because it varies by state, it varies by county, varies by city, and there's not a lot of oversight. And all of this, I was not an expert on this. And that's just while you're in there, right? And the thing that was the most, I might be jumping ahead in your questions, but the thing that was the most surprising to me, because when I was in jail, we would have goodbye parties, right? And there's so much creativity in jail. I got the best makeover of my life from a box of colored pencils and hot water. I was full glam, right? And there was artists and everybody was full of good intentions. I'm gonna go back to school. I'm gonna stay away from that man. I'm gonna get my children back. I'm not gonna do drugs again. I'm gonna get no one was like, yeah, I can't wait to come back. And we'd have a goodbye party. And someone would make a fabulous cake out of a pot of hot water and a peanut butter sandwich. I don't know how, and it was amazing. And they'd be back a week later, and before I got out, I was like, oh. And I'm ashamed of this too. I had judgment. I was like, oh, she's so stupid. How did she come back, right? And I thought, okay, I'm gonna do the thing. I'm a rule follower. I had a lot of felonies, but at heart, I'm a rule follower. It's like, I'm gonna follow the rules, and then I'm gonna follow the rules after, and then that will be behind me. And I didn't know all the ways in which you can follow the rules and still end up back in jail that have nothing to do with doing drugs again, have nothing to do with committing a crime again, and that you are never done. I am still not done. I am 15 years out. I got, like the bio sounds cool, but I'm still affected because I'm a formerly incarcerated woman, a justice impacted woman. And it never goes away. And that's just in the laws, like the illogical consequences. That's not with judgment and gossip and stigma. And the thing I didn't realize is that, everything good I did for 40 years before my arrest, or like, let's say 20, let's not do the math. No, okay, 40. Everything good I did before them, it became erased, Like everything I was before that became erased. It didn't matter that I'd been a good mom for all those years and my children felt loved. It didn't matter that I had a master's degree. It didn't matter that I was, a Little League coach or school board or like I could write. None of that mattered. I now became this one thing. And that one thing is really hard to move past. And that's with all the privilege of not looking like that's your one thing. Yeah.
Your nonprofit is the Gemma Project, right?
Gemma.
How can we help?
No, no. The Gemma Project, it's the gemmaproject.org, and it is gender and trauma responsive services for women while they're incarcerated and after. Because the number one predictor of a woman going back to jail is poverty, right? And so you already have a wage gap, you already are gonna make less because you've been incarcerated, and you can't get a job, you can't rent a house because you have to check a box, and it's different by state. So you can help by caring, you can help by educating yourself, you can help by, asking yourself I think it's 1 in 3 Americans are under some sort of carceral control. That means they've been arrested. I mean, we could do I won't make anyone raise their hand, but someone's been arrested, they're on probation, maybe they got a DUI, and it's all kept secret and ashamed. But, ask yourself how many justice impacted women are in my book club, in my church group, in my PTA meeting, in my school board, in my tennis camp, like whatever it is. And if you say none, statistically that's wrong. It's just that they're scared to say, and they're scared of judgment. I was so scared of people finding out. And I was racking up my good credits for the moment when people found out, right? Look, I'm good adjacent. Here's me with the Dalai Lama. Trying to rack up my resume of goodness so that when the truth comes out, which it always does, I would be able to defend my goodness or defend my bad, I was trying to defend myself. I was preparing. So I think if we can just have some empathy and compassion, and if you can hire someone, I can give you, if you see me around the next day, I will give you 10 reasons why a formerly incarcerated woman is gonna be your best employee, right? And I've found always that people who have lost everything, people who are starting over, people who are desperate to feel valuable and worthy again, like I was, they will rise to the level that you believe in them every single time. Every single time.
So Oprah picked the book in February. How did she do it? Did she call you and go, "Mama love"? Did you do a good Oprah? Do it, try it.
No, I'll tell you this. So Simon Schuster's my publisher, and the publicist started sending me some weird emails, and I was like, why? Because you have a publicist when the book launches. It was 7 months after my book came out, and I wanted Oprah to pick my book. I'm not gonna be like, no, I didn't. No, I wanted it. Every author wants it, right? And she had picked a book that I had co-written, and there was a moment in December where I was like, it was after the holidays, my book had been out, it had done well, and I was like, I need to manifest Oprah. Like I said that. Because I had this moment where I was, am I better actually at being other people than myself in books. Like I had this moment. And so the publisher in January was, it was a whole year in a few weeks. And my publisher, they asked me to be on a Zoom to discuss the paperback launch. And I was like, well, this is early and a little weird. And I was up for like a Goodreads Book of the Year. I was like, is that a big thing? Maybe, I thought, I do plots. So I was like trying to plot this. And so they had me on Zoom in the last minute, like, we use this new podcast Zoom thing. And I'm an agent. I was like, no, you don't. I just had a meeting with, so I was like a little bit like, this felt weird. But I got on there. So I quickly got out of my pajamas and they were like, hop on. I put a little blush on because I was like, they're acting weird. But I thought it was a Goodreads choice thing. And so the publicist was like, Lara, we're thinking of re-engaging the book clubs. Is there anyone in particular? And again, like, this is my job. So I was like, well, can you tell me which ones you have that have said no? Because I assume they all have. And she's like, well, which one would you want? And I was like, well, which one I would want. And then Oprah popped in the Zoom and said, which one, Lara? Right? And the thing is this is a moment where, like, I take improv, so like I have an instinct to try and be funny, and sometimes that's very inappropriate. And so when she said that, there's a moment too where you're like, first thought wrong, don't say it. Because when she's like, well, which one? Like the like jokey person was like, well, Reese, of course. Like I almost said that, and I was like, so if you look at the video, I was like, but I was still shocked. Like it's the dream, but it's shocking, And then she was like, no one knows how your book got in my house in December. And then it became this whole sort of conspiracy thing. And I was like, I feel like people think I broke in, which is, it was triggering. It was like a little triggering. I was like, I didn't do anything wrong,
Did she teach you anything about your book that you didn't know? Because it had come out in December before. When did it come out?
It came out August 1st.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so 6 months, 6, 7,
Yeah.
8 months. Did she teach you something new about it that you didn't realize?
She said to me, because it was Oprah, I mean, this is a crazy thing to say. She said, she retaught me. I was hoping that it would help, but she was like, no, this is going to help a lot of people. Like it had helped some people, but with that spotlight, it's going to help a lot of people. And I was like, it's because you're Oprah. And she goes, no, I am just, what is she? She's like, Lara, I am just a vessel for your message. And I was like, Oprah's my vessel. Yeah, I know. But I was like, no, but.
You need to make a t-shirt of that.
Is this being filmed? Yeah. But I will tell you, 3 weeks ago, she has cared about incarcerated women. For 2 years, she's been secretly doing her book club in the biggest women's prison, which is a Central Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. She's been going in there, no press, no publicity, and doing book club. And so she actually told the women before it was announced. I was like, you think they're going to keep it a secret? We're under NDA. But we went, a few weeks ago, we went there and did book club with 150 women that are in her group. I got Simon Schuster donated hundreds and hundreds of books into the prison. It was like my favorite book event besides this one, of course.
Thank you.
That I've done. And then I'm going back next month to do it with all 2,000 other women. And the warden is, they're going to give credit for time served to every single woman who's reading the book. And that feels worth it.
I'm going way over because I work really hard. So just give me 3 more minutes. Okay. Where am I? I wanted to ask one more question, sorry. Oh, so in March of 2024, you wrote an Oprah's daily piece, and you said, but memoir, unlike autobiography, is a narrative around a fixed period of time. The memoir ends where it ends, but life continues. Can you catch us up?
Oh, how many minutes? I will tell you that Simon Schuster, it's due in a month. I'm writing a bonus chapter for the paperback, which is going to update, because there's so many story arcs that continued. And I had a meeting with my editor just right before I came here, and I was like, well, I could talk about my marriage. Spoiler alert if you've read the book. I could talk about Oprah because she's in the book, I could talk about my home. I could talk about my children. I could talk about meeting the neighbor, all the things. And what he said to me is, Lara, what do you want to convince the readers? Like, we're still learning. Like, I've written all these books. I was like, oh, yeah, that's good. He said, what do you want to convince the readers or reconvince them or double down on, or what is different? And then you pick what you're going to tell. And so I've been thinking about that. And I think the thing I've really learned, because, as amazing as Oprah was in January, and sometimes, it's hard to experience the good things. Right? Sometimes, I just read this. I didn't write this. I wish I had. But so I read, it was probably a meme, but it said, we heal trauma to handle the joy, not to handle the hard things. And I was like, oh, that's true. That felt true. And so on January 1st, my father passed away. I got an entirely new family. I couldn't even put that in the book. That's it was too unbelievable. But my father passed away. My marriage ended abruptly and surprisingly. And then Oprah called, and all these things were happening, and I was okay. And I was like, what is different? And I was like, because I've gone through betrayal, I've gone through death, I've gone through grief, I've gone through good things and hard things. Like, what is different? And I realized that I've always gone through them alone. And I had this community around me. And I no longer had to look good. Like, oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to swear.
I don't think shoot is bad.
I know. No, I was going to say something else, and I'm like...
What do I know?
We never knew Mama Love would be in the church either, so here we are. But I think, I didn't have any look good. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I just wrote this book with all these happy endings, and now, there's not happy endings. What am I going to do? I'm going to pretend. And I didn't have that. I was like, yeah, life is still messy. And the way I go through the mess is so different. I used to not tell anybody what was going on. I'd be like, this could be on fire, and I'd be like, no, it's warm. I'm fine. You're fine. Look, talk amongst yourselves. And now I have a feeling. I call 27 people, like, this is a feeling. What is this? But I let people tell me what to do. I said, I'm hurting and I need help. And I've never been able to ask for help in my life. And I was like, oh, that's what's different. It's so much easier. I don't know if everybody else probably learned this really early on, but I was like, oh my gosh, you go through hard things with other people? What? What kind of magic is that? And so the things were hard, but it's been okay. It's been amazing. And also, I really believe that if I told you, because I think ultimately what I wanted at 7, I'm gonna arc us around here because
You're a writer.
Yeah. I think what I wanted, I was hiding in books to see other people, but I desperately wanted to be seen. And that's what I've wanted my whole life. I think everybody wants that, just to be seen. Good, bad, ugly, this, that. And this book is you seeing everything you probably didn't even want to know you wanted to see. And I wanted to show you, but what I've found is I thought people would run away screaming. I thought people would run away from me. And it's the opposite.
We see you.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for 2 questions because I was so selfish. So raise your hand and they'll bring around the mic. Does anyone have any questions for Lara?
Hi, I've also had the pleasure of your company the past 2 nights at dinner. And I'm so impressed with your humor. And I'm curious what role humor has played. Have you always been funny? And what role has humor played as you work your way through trauma?
I've always been hilarious. No. Humor is always, fun and play is at the core of who I am. I think you kind of lose that when you're going through hard things. And I certainly lost that, I lost writing when I was struggling with addiction. But it's always, life is absurd. And I think when you can see the absurdity, even in hard things, that's a gift. That is a huge value of mine. And I love in writing and in real life to make people cry and laugh. That's just a true thing. And I think especially in memoir, when there's heavy things, you have to roller coaster. You have to, I had some great jokes in there my editor cut out.
Rude.
Yeah, so rude. He was like, yeah, that's not that funny. So not as funny as I think I am, but yeah, humor is it helps everything. It helps every hard thing.
One more question.
So this is a question maybe from the perspective where most of us are probably parents, and you had these 4 beautiful children, and you know you've been through what you've experienced in the trauma and addiction. And what would you say was maybe the best or the more effective advice that you've been able to share with your children to make sure that they can best navigate their futures, knowing that they maybe have this addiction gene?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think I took it one for the team because they all turned out great so far. I think, the gift of what I went through made me a much more real mother, a real parent. And there was nothing my boys couldn't talk to me about. Because what I'm going to be like, oh my God, what? You didn't put your seatbelt on? Like what, And I think one of the gifts, my son Dylan, he says, I quoted him wrong in here. He said, forgiveness is automatic, but trust you have to earn. And I think he said I left out the forgiveness is automatic, so maybe I'll fix it. But my children, and all children, they just wanted me to be okay. And one of the things I did is I just had to show up. If I keep my word, I am not going to be a minute late. We're 15 years out, and I'm like, I'm okay, and it's more my vigilance than theirs. It was about 6 months after I got released, and my oldest had started college, and I got a phone call from him. This is Dylan, and he's my most analytical black and white thinker. He said, Mom, I'm going to have all my mail forwarded to you. You're the most responsible adult in my life. My dad just keeps losing my mail. And I was like, oh my God. I had won the Academy Award. It felt so good. And so I made sure that I always showed up. My youngest, Caden, just finished yesterday. He texted me last night, his first year of college at UC San Diego. And when I dropped him off at college, there was that moment. That was the first time. It wasn't like hanging out with all the people I got to hang out with books, where I was proud of me. Because that moment when I was parking my car, because some reason they're gonna ticket you on drop-off, but I was parking my car and I was like, wow, this could have turned out so differently. Statistically, he's more likely to go to prison than UC San Diego with a 4 point. I was proud of us. And it was the first time I was like, okay, we did this. Now what? That was the moment. It was such a big moment for me. And he just finished yesterday. He texted and said, my final's in God's hands now. I'm heading home. That was it. But my children, they're amazing and I'm biased and they're wonderful. And I think I've shown them one of the greatest gifts is what it's like to fail spectacularly and get back up.
Lara, thank you for being here. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your story. And thank you all for being here to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.